and gentlemen, happy Wednesday night. Welcome to Deep in the Plus. I'm your host, Rob Whiteside, and as always, thank you for being with us. We appreciate you. Please, if you have not already, subscribe to WDWNT TV. That's this channel. And like this video as it helps people to find us. And tonight, you're going to want people to find this one. I have with me Allison. How are you, Allison?
Hi, good evening, everyone. I am doing well. How are you, Rob?
I'm great. Thanks so much. I love it when you come on. Allison used to be with us on Park Center all the time, and now she is kind enough to come on and review movies and TV shows with me here on Deep in the Plus. I think the first one we did was the Walt Disney World, the Mouseketeers Go to Walt Disney World, which was very campy. And then we've done 10 Things I Hate About You, which was a big hit, and we did The Princess Diaries, and we did Enchanted, and we did Disenchanted. And so tonight we're going to do something sort of also a little enchanted, which is Splash, the 1984 movie Splash. And honestly, I feel like I picked this one originally and came to you and said, hey, should we do this one? Almost like a lead up to Valentine's Day kind of a thing, because it is a romantic comedy. But then it also kind of corresponds with the closing of Splash Mountain. And I don't know if you've heard this story. I think a lot of people have heard this story that, you know, Splash Mountain is themed after Song of the South. There's not really a Splash Mountain in that movie, but that Michael Eisner had this great idea to cross-promote this movie that he loves so much, Splash, the very first Touchstone movie, and cross-promote it with this new attraction that opened up in Disneyland. So the rumor is that Splash Mountain was named after this movie, which makes literally no sense except to put the word splash into people's minds. So
Sure, and it's what we called it, right? We all just called it Splash. Let's go ride Splash.
there you go. There you go. It's very fun. So when you think of this movie, and when I said this movie to you, like, do you have fond memories of this movie? Where did you first come in contact with this? Because I know this couldn't have been your first viewing of this movie.
No, it certainly wasn't my first viewing. So I was born a year after this movie came out, but that meant that this was regularly on TV and regularly rented at Blockbuster, which is a very old-fashioned sentence to say, by friends growing up. And so I watched it a lot in my childhood. I believe the first time I ever watched it was at a play date at my friend's house in her den, probably in the early 80s, maybe 89 or 1990. So it was 5 years or so after the movie came out. But it was still very much in the cultural like milieu at the time. And so I remember like being completely enchanted by the movie as a child. And I remember really hating, we'll get to it when we go through the movie, but really hating when she gets put in the tank toward the end of the movie. And that part making me afraid and not wanting to watch the rest of it. But I do remember like loving
Wow.
70% of it and also not understanding any of the rom-com pieces of it.
So this is a pretty intense movie for you for a play date. I totally get that. One of the things that that I thought about when we were watching this movie is that it really reminds me. And first of all, this movie's almost 40 years old. Came out in 1984, so we're looking at the looking down the barrel at the 40th anniversary of this movie. So I assume there are no spoilers here. That's the other thing I wanted to throw out here. I feel like anybody who would watch this or is now watching this review knows the deal about Splash. So as far as this movie goes, though, I draw a lot of comparisons to The Little Mermaid, and this one came out 5 years before The Little Mermaid. The screenplay
Ah,
doesn't say it was based on the original Little Mermaid tale, but it seems very similar. I mean, if you think about the fact that Ariel, she pines for Eric from afar, the same way that Madison does for Allen, and then she finds him in the water, and she brings him ashore, and he's like a little dazed and doesn't really know what's happening. And then when he finds her again, she can't talk. She actually
mm-hmm.
sits in the bathtub and like brushes her hair. Like it, there's a lot of that that feels very connected to the Little Mermaid. So I kind of jokingly refer to this as like, was this the first live action Little Mermaid? Kind of.
And there are actually like scenes in this where you think where it's surely the animators had to have gotten this idea for recreating it in in the Little Mermaid movie, right? So when she is when they throw the bucket of water on her, and her tail comes out at the outside of the gala, and she's on the floor, and she's like, and she looks up, and it was almost like, Eric, I'm sorry, and then it was the same posture, the same everything, and then when when he realizes that she is the person that saved him as a boy, you could have just like taken the lines from The Little Mermaid where Eric says like, "It was you all along." Like you could have just superimposed that language and it would have fit right into the movie.
Yeah. No, I agree, and it's just it's kind of nuts to me because we're on the precipice of a new Little Mermaid that's coming out this year. So I feel like there's just a lot of Mermaid going on between the original, the 40th anniversary coming up next year of Splash, and then now Splash Mountain leaving, and then here is a new Little Mermaid coming up. So lots of stuff going on with that. Um, this is, we talked about it being a romantic comedy, but this is a little blue for Disney. This was the first time where they used the Touchstone brand. Back when Michael Eisner signed on for Disney, I think he saw the opportunity to make more adult films, more grown-up films. Maybe that's what I mean. Not more
I think
adult
it's
films. He
Ron
wasn't
Miller,
looking to do
right?
that. No,
Ron
I think
Miller
this.
did it?
I feel like this
It
was more an
was
Eisner
Michael
thing.
Eisner. Ah, okay.
But the idea was that they were going to have three brands. They had Hollywood, Touchstone, and then of course the Disney brand. And so this was the first Touchstone movie. It was directed by Ron Howard. There's a lot of big things about this movie as I'm going back and watching through it. So this isn't one that they absorbed from Fox. This was originally part of the Disney company, but it is on Disney Plus. But it also has a little bit of nudity. There's some kind of like there's some stuff on the internet about how Disney Plus for that version kind of covered Madison up a little bit when she was running into the water with maybe a little bit more hair on her back, so that like you saw a little bit less of her. And it there's a lot of creepy too with little Freddie, played by the grown-up Freddie, played by John Candy, but little Freddie dropping coins on the deck of the ship so that he can look up ladies' dresses. Just the most uncomfortable thing, and yet then they show grown-up John Candy doing the same thing. And you're like, and so like and Tom Hanks, who plays Allen, pulls him up. He's like, "What are you still doing with that?" He's like, "Well, when I find something that works, I stick with it." It's just that part of
Yeah.
it seems super super dated, but the rest of this story is like, not to keep using the word tale, but a tale as old as time, right? It's a love story, and there's so many similarities to other movies. I was After this was over, it referred me to Big, and I was like, oh, another Tom Hanks supernatural style movie, right? Is that what you saw afterwards or no?
Sure, that is what I saw afterwards. But
Yeah.
this movie made me think of other like Tom Hanks rom-coms, like You've Got Mail, and like because in this too, I think he's just such a likable guy, and you forgive like he's like totally withdrawn from her when he's like sitting in the tank and she's obviously devastated and he's like kind of being a jerk, and he's like sort of a jerk in You've Got Mail because he's but that's another story. But you forgive it because it's Tom Hanks and he's so lovable and he's just like so perfectly cast. But I was reading that he actually was like hardly a big name at all, and there was like this cascade of big names, including like Bill Murray and John Travolta, of people who were considered for this role. And thank goodness for any of the pieces that wouldn't have landed so well, they had people as lovable as Tom Hanks and John Candy in these roles because it has made this movie really survive.
Well, and speaking of cast, you've got John Candy and Eugene Levy together because they were part of the Second City group, and the fact that the two of them are in this movie together and they don't really interact with each other so much. There's a little bit of that when they finally get to the Institute to free Madison. We can talk about that in a little bit, but it's neat to me to see those guys in here. And for Eugene Levy, who we're always used to seeing as a very comedic character, yes, he has his like bumbling idiot moments in here, but there's some serious moments too with him that I look at and think, oh well, this was a big deal for him. But also
Yeah.
remembering that this was Ron Howard, like one of his early directorials, and I feel like he did a great job with it. There's a lot of timing things as I'm watching it. The part where Madison saves Allen, brings him onto the beach, and then she runs away. And he turns around, and just as he turns around, over his shoulder, you see the fin like flip into the water, just slightly over his shoulder. And I think that I feel like Ron Howard pays attention to a lot of those details about how that looks in a shot. There's a lot of reveals in this one. So like when the movie first starts out, it says like 20 years ago. And so they flash back to, and it's in sepia, and they flash back to this boat coming from Cape Cod, and this family is on there, and young Allen Bauer is on the boat, and something is drawing him to the water, and you don't really see it, and he jumps in, and then all of a sudden you see the face of the little girl, but you don't see that she's a mermaid until at the very last part. And so I think she was a great little actress. She jumps, she comes out of the water. He's been saved. She's now met him and feels like she's like love at first sight. And now she's sad and she's kind of rubbing her tears. And then she flips over and you see the fin go at that point. So again, we know it's about a mermaid. It's Splash. Like that's the thing. It's on the cover. It's all over the place. But the fact that they kind of wait for those little reveals seems to mean a lot in this movie. And again, I think it speaks to Ron Howard and his directing.
Yeah, yeah, it gives you a little bit of anticipation, and that helps build excitement for a romantic comedy and draws you in.
Yeah. Um, so, and then Daryl Hannah had not had a ton of stuff, I think, by the time she hit this. She had a few things. And, she certainly didn't seem to have a problem without clothes on. And you know what? Again, that's another one where, like, from a cinematography standpoint, they really they weren't necessarily hiding anything, but they were making sure you didn't see a lot. I mean, it was PG. And the way that the water went, flowed with her hair. There was a lot of moments where they would cut early and things like that. Because I'm just like, how are they getting away with this?
Well, here's one reason they got away with it, which I had to look up because I thought, how did this get a PG rating? But apparently, there was no PG-13 until later on in 1984. And so if this movie came out a couple of months later, it probably would have a PG-13 rating. But because it didn't exist, that's why it got that rating. But
Gotcha. Oh.
But yeah, I mean, I think that you're exactly right. They do it in a very tasteful way. It's not a tawdry PG-13, even if that's what it was rated.
A tawdry PG-13. So I want to do a little bit of something. I talked with our good friend Jake, who is our producer with WDWNT. He's the man. He there's a little tool that they use on News Tonight. I think we've used it on Boxed In before, where we let people in the chat kind of interact. And so one of the things I thought would be good for tonight is I want to talk a little bit now about that there was a sequel to this, which I know very little about. And then there was also scheduled to be, and apparently is still a thing, a remake of this. So what I want to ask everybody in the chat is if you, and hopefully this will work, so we're just trying this out. If you think that the next step for this movie, and I know we're a little bit early in the show, the next step for this movie should be a sequel with Tom Hanks and Daryl Hannah, not the sequel that came out called Splash 2 TOO, but with them, Allen and Madison years later, then say sequel, and if not, say remake. So it would look like this, and it'd be hashtag sequel or hashtag remake. And I would love to hear from you guys in the chat what you think. We'll check back in on this from time to time. But that's something that, when I'm looking at this stuff, it kind of hits me as do I want to see the next step of this story? Do I want to see what happens? Because they do leave it on such a cliffhanger at the end as to what happened to Allen and to Madison. And so I would love to hear what everybody thinks. And again, hashtag sequel if you would prefer a sequel. And when I say sequel, I don't mean the one. So apparently there was a movie called Splash 2, TOO. It was on ABC, and it is not on Disney Plus. So that says to me that it was probably awful. I think it happened 5 years after this one. So I'm a little bit in shock as to what exactly they were thinking there, because it has none of the original cast. It still refers to Allen Bauer and Madison, but it has none of the original cast in it. So then after that, there was this talk of a reboot, basically, a remake of this movie where it had Jillian Bell, who is a comedic actress. She was in Bridesmaids. She was in Office Christmas Party, Workaholics. She would be in it with Channing Tatum, but it would be a reversal where she would be like the Allen character, and Channing Tatum would have been the merman. So that's the remake that apparently was pitched 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, and it's apparently as of 2019 was still in play as something that they would do. So I guess they had to do all the Magic Mike stuff, you know, and see what was going to happen there. So again, hashtag remake, hashtag sequel. Let us know what you think. So far, it looks like we're leaning remake, but that's pretty much just because Arch Fox is in chat testing it out. So I don't want to see that remake, by the way. That's not a thing I want to see, is Channing Tatum as the merman and Jillian Bell. I don't know why. I just I feel like, and I've said this about Nightmare Before Christmas, like it is in this little box, and I'd love it to stay in that little box. I don't need there to be what happens in Easter Town and what happens in Thanksgiving Town. I'm good with it the way it is. I like going back to it. Give me more merch, absolutely, but I want to look at it back in that way. What do you think about all that?
I don't want to put a thumb on the scale right now for one or the other or neither while people are voting. But I'll say this, because we did Enchanted together, and then we did the sequel to Enchanted together, and I didn't think we needed a sequel to Enchanted, but then I enjoyed what they did with it. Probably wouldn't rewatch it like the original, but I enjoyed it. So I think if they do it right, this could be very good. But if it becomes Little Mermaid Return to the Sea, then I would have hoped that had never gotten made.
We're leaning sequel, but again, I think Jake has stepped in and righted the ship a little bit. I agree. It's neat to see those characters come back. We saw it in Hocus Pocus. We saw it in, like you said, in Enchanted. But I don't know. It's kind of weird. It's kind of weird. The other thing is that we could. I was kind of playing around with this before, but because of the way our setup is, it would look like this over top. So maybe we'll just leave it for now and see what people are thinking. So when it comes back to this movie, it's 111 minutes. I feel like that's the right length for a movie anymore, because it feels like in 2023 a lot of movies have been 3 hours long, like Avatar Way of Water's 3.5 or something ridiculous like that. That's a long time to sit and watch a movie, especially because my attention span gets shorter and shorter as time goes on. So I feel like this was a good length of movie. I love that Ron Howard was a part of it, and I don't know if you looked into this or not, but apparently Ron Howard's brother, Clint Howard, is always in Ron Howard's movies. That's like his thing. But his dad was also in this movie, which I did not realize until I looked it up. So he was Mr. McCullough, the guy who was yelling at Alan about the cherries in the beginning.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So he has since passed away. He passed
Yeah.
away in 2017, but it was neat that he got to be in this movie. I don't know how many others he put his father into, but again, Clint Howard has pretty much been in all of the movies. Clint Howard was in this one as one of the guests who was walking through the party, and then or to the wedding. He was walking into the wedding, and then Tom Hanks yells at him. He's like, she broke up with me, okay?" And he's just kind of like, "Oh, all right, I didn't ask anything." So that was a little bit weird, but the way that, again, that
Another
this
one of
movie,
those scenes where you're glad it's Tom Hanks. It's
yes,
just it's comical and adorable when he does it, but if anyone else did it, it'd be like, oh, this guy needs anger management classes.
yeah, no, I agree. One of the things though that I wondered about too, based on what we were talking about this movie being called Splash and the idea of Splash Mountain, is that Tom Hanks, not once but twice in this movie, sings "Zippity Doo Dah."
Yes. Oh my gosh. That's exactly
Like,
right.
was that foreshadowing? Like, did they put that in there specifically for that, or is that just kind of the song that a guy who met a naked woman who walked up on the beach would sing to himself? I don't know.
I can't imagine it's intentional.
That it
But
is intentional? You don't think it is
yeah, I can't
intentional?
imagine that it isn't. I don't think it is. Well, so what year did Splash Mountain open in Disneyland?
89, I believe. So it
Yeah,
would have
I mean,
been,
this is
yeah,
5 years earlier and maybe 6 years while they're doing the filming.
production.
So to put it into the script and put it into the production, this is like, it's a lot. I feel like it's a really nice, happy accident.
All right, that's fair. That's fair. Um, Arch Fox says you didn't give us a nope option, Rob. Yeah, I didn't.
Mhm.
I didn't give you a nope option. You have to choose sequel or remake. Sorry. Um, yeah, we'll get back to this in a second. But let me just say that in general, I think this movie, again, is a really good romantic comedy. Now, I think the question that I asked at the beginning was, does this stand the test of time? And we'll get to that in the end here. But there are a lot of things that I think in some movies you go back and you feel like, again, the John Candy thing with him dropping the coins feels very inappropriate. 2020. I mean, even though we're showing him being kind of nasty, it still feels like something that you would never put into a movie, no matter how nasty you were making the person out to be. The other part of it that I find interesting is that he was all excited because he got his letter posted in Penthouse magazine, which apparently was a thing that people were excited to do back in the day. So he's like, oh, and they printed it word for word. And so he bought copies for everybody, and he brings them around to the, to the fruit stand. So I don't know. It's John Candy in this. I think is there's just enough of him. I think that in some of the movies that
Hmm.
John Candy is, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. I don't mean to speak ill of him, but I think in some movies there's a little too much John Candy. Um, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. I think there's just a little too much John Candy in that movie.
Cool
Um,
Runnings, maybe a little too much.
yeah, maybe,
Home
but like
Alone,
for
not enough.
fair. But I look at this and I go, you know what? That's just the right amount of John Candy to be in this movie, and he was very funny. The Eugene Levy thing. I think he always kind of plays an unlikable guy. And then like you said, Tom Hanks. He's always kind of the likable guy, and there's, as you mentioned at the top, there's not many other people who could pull off what they did here. So the whole thing goes that he's grown up. He and his brother have taken over their father's fruit business. The brother Freddie, played by John Candy, is very kind of like, he's not very involved. He just wants to do all of like the partying with the potential clients and doesn't really want to do the work. And the Tom Hanks character Allen is all about getting the work done and you know making things happen at the business. And he's got a girlfriend who he's not really, seemingly not that committed to, because on the phone he can't tell her that he loves her. She leaves, and now he's sad when they go to the wedding of one of their coworkers. Then he gets very drunk, decides to go back out to Cape Cod because there's something about Cape Cod that he loves. He can't really put his finger on it. So there's something about his inner child that remembers Cape Cod and this experience he had, but he just feels like that's home when he goes there. And so he takes a cab ride to 300 miles to Cape Cod from New York. And then when he gets there, he meets up with Eugene Levy. He's doing some kind of science experiment. We don't know what. He gets in a boat. He goes out. He gets hit on the head. Madison, the mermaid, saves him, brings him on the beach, and then runs away. And now he's just like, I don't. I guess I'll never see her again. Then she appears on Ellis Island, walking through that naked big crowd of people. Gets to a police station. They call him because she happens to have his wallet, and then they're together. So they've made their meeting, but she still can't talk, and he doesn't know where she's from. She doesn't have an identification. She can't say anything. All she can do is make out with him nonstop.
Yes, which is another thing that's a little creepy. There's a lot of like physical intimacy very early on without any like real communication, and that's one of those things that I feel like, oh, I'm not sure that that would go fly exactly as it was written to this movie. But again, something that you can forgive because it's Tom Hanks.
Well, let's flip it, because this remake is supposed to flip it, right? The idea is that Channing Tatum's supposed to be the merman. Is it even less acceptable if he's just randomly like macking on this girl that he just met?
Yeah, that's very true because there's something a little stalkerish about about this mermaid kind of chasing this guy that she's seen now like twice in his life. Um, and yeah, if that's Channing Tatum doing exactly that, that's also a little uncomfortable.
Jake says in chat, never too much John Candy. Yeah. No, well, so the remake is supposed to be, from what I saw, Brian Grazer is still going to be producing this if it happens. He produced this when he produced a lot of stuff with Ron Howard and Imagine Entertainment. But in this one, it's supposed to be apparently like the original script was, more from the mermaid's point of view rather than Alan's point of view. So if that's the case, then I guess it's really more from Channing Tatum's point of view in this one, I assume. But in that case, I don't know how that would have worked because, again, when she comes up on the land, she can't speak English. She doesn't, like, who is she communicating with? And I guess that's what happens in Little Mermaid is she speaks to Flounder and she speaks to Sebastian and she has these other sea creatures that we just assume she's not speaking English. She's speaking whatever their language is, and we just happen to be able to understand it. So I don't know how that's going to work. I assume that that's why they made these changes, and they made it that really Alan is the one who carries the narration, the narrative, and moves it through.
Maybe if
So
they
there's
redo it, we'll see Channing Tatum's like mer people, and they'll be speaking English just to make it easier.
well, and that there's a lot of mystery about this too. There's a lot of stuff that I feel like, when they're doing this, they don't tell you. She just says where I'm from, this, where I'm from, that. We don't really know where she's from. There's a little bit of what looks like a cityscape at the very end of the movie. Did you catch that?
Mm-mm, no, I could. It was so water is so cloudy, although much clearer than the actual Hudson would be, I think. But it's yeah, it's hard to see kind of where they're swimming at the end.
Um, yeah. There's a part of this movie that gives me anxiety. Can I share that with you?
Please.
When so she comes onto land, she meets up with Alan. They do something between the third and fourth floor that they don't tell us about in the movie, but we are led to believe that they stopped the elevator on the third and fourth floor. Um, he leaves her for the day. She does a whole bunch of stuff. I want to talk about that in a second. But when there is a moment where she decides to, in the middle of the night, sneak off and get a bath, almost like she has to let her fin down. And so when that happens and she's in that bath, she's kind of, again, I said, like, it gets a little steamy in there, and she's brushing her hair, and she brought some Morton salt in there, which they're very sure to show you that, like, this is salt water that they're going into. But when that scene started, I had this flashback of, oh my God, I hate this scene because he acts almost inappropriately, like, panicked in it, and
Yeah.
you worry for her that she's going to get caught because she doesn't want to share the secret with him. She wants to enjoy her 6 fun-filled days with him. She doesn't want to, ruin everything by saying, "Oh, by the way, I'm a fish," and so she's taken this moment to let her fin down, and he, for some reason, gets up and starts banging on the door, and it seems to me to have an overreaction. I think you feel the same.
Yeah, no, that's another one of the moments where it's like, well, I'm going to forgive this immediately because it's Tom Hanks and he's going to like smile and just like brush it off. But it's like terrifying that she's in the bathroom, the door is locked, and she's like, no, don't come in. I'm busy taking a bath. And he's like, I'm worried. What are you doing? And he starts banging down the door. That's insane. Like, there are any number of things that she might be doing in the restroom in the middle of the night that he doesn't need to be involved with, and he should just leave her alone. It
But
seemed
doesn't this look
so
like a scene
manufactured.
from a horror movie? Like the
Yes.
panic?
Yeah. Yeah. That looks like something out of like the shower scene in what's the movie I'm thinking of?
Psycho?
Shower scene. Yeah, it was Psycho. Thank you.
Jessica said in chat that they should call the next one Step Up to Under the Sea. I like that. That's a good one. Nothing will ever be Step Up to the Streets. Like, come on. That's a brilliant title. Um, But yeah, it again, I was very like filled with anxiety and in that moment because I remember this being a very intense scene with him banging on the door and she's hurrying to try to like dry off so that the tail disappears and he's just like, I'm gonna break it down, I'm gonna break it down. She's like, no, and she's almost crying, like, don't do it. And he does it anyway, and she's like, can you make me some more pancakes? Or it's just like, and so he bangs the door open, and you can see the salt sitting there, and she's wrapped up, and he's like, well, why didn't you want me to come in? She goes, I was shy. And it's just,
Yeah.
I again, this is like ingrained in my head because I remember that scene and just being fearful for her.
Yeah, and that moment where she says, "I was shy," and he's like, "Really? After all of these other things that we did, we've known each other for 12 hours. You're suddenly shy." And it's like, "Well, yes, sir. Consent can be withdrawn at any moment," and she's withdrawing consent, which is one of those things where it just doesn't hold up.
Yep. And as I say this about this movie being sort of it is literally a fish out of water movie. That's the kind of thing that we have here, and then it reminded me of Elf. There's the whole thing where she's trying to go in, through the revolving door. She's in this big city she's
Oh
never
yeah,
been in. She's seeing all these things she's never seen before. She's like excited and overwhelmed and like eyes of a babe kind of a situation. But the same thing happens in Big. It's just reversed. Tom Hanks in that one is the Madison, is the Buddy the Elf, because he's like, these are grown up things that I've never experienced before, and come jump on this trampoline that I was able to buy with money I made, and do this piano, and so it's interesting to see the flip or the reversal of him from these two movies that were very close together. For one where he is the childlike fish out of water, and the other one where he is the responsible straight man adult who is like, she's the comedy in the or the fish out of water.
yeah. I love that. I hadn't thought about that. But that's
I thought
really
about a
good.
lot of things with this one. I really did. And again, just like I think of the original Batman movie as like somebody made the perfect movie for me. I think of in Modern Family when the episode where he was getting the iPad and it was his birthday, and Phil Dunphy says it's like God and Steve Jobs got together and said, "Happy birthday, Phil," because it was coming out on his birthday. I felt that about that original Batman movie because I there weren't a lot of comic book movies. It was an actor who I liked, Michael Keaton, although I wasn't really sure I'd love him in that role, and I think he actually pulled it off. It was Jack Nicholson, who was a huge name at the time. It was Tim Burton, who I loved Tim Burton, Danny Elfman, and Prince. And I'm like, what? You just made the perfect movie for me. Like all of that stuff put together. This one is kind of the same way. I was rambling about that to talk about this. This is kind of the same way. Is that this is Ron Howard at like his early as he's hitting his stride. Same thing with Tom Hanks after Bosom Buddies, where he's starting to hit his stride in the movies. Daryl Hannah, same thing, where like this was kind of like on the verge of her being big breakout roles, and then the same thing, John Candy, Eugene Levy. This was kind of like so many things rolled into one that it's hard for me to like look back on this and go, why don't we talk about this movie more? Why don't we talk about this movie more, Allison?
Yeah, it's like all of these people who became icons over the course of the next decade or more. I mean, like Daryl Hannah was just this like the if you think about the quintessential like beautiful 1980s early 1990s person, it's Daryl Hannah. Like that she just like encapsulated what the standard of beauty was at the time. And then Tom Hanks was like the ideal leading man for like the whole next. I mean, he still is. He's in so many movies, and a lot of them involving water. I started to think about it from like from from Castaway to like even in Forrest Gump, he's on a shrimping boat, and even in like the movie where he's a captain and there are pirates that take over the ship from a couple of years ago. A lot of movies involving water with Tom Hanks. Anyway, really iconic guy. Eugene Levy, obviously, he's like a caricature of himself in like every movie, but he's like
Yeah.
brand new and green in this movie. Tom Hanks is 28 in this movie, which is like unbelievable. But all these people become icons. Ron Howard is an icon of cinema, right? And on top of this, this is like the ideal rom com for the 80s, and it has all of these like nods, or like I would say they're Easter eggs, except it happened before Little Mermaid came out, which was like the Frozen of my childhood.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it is pretty amazing to think that when this movie came out, Tom Hanks was the young leading man, and now he's Geppetto.
Yeah.
So, and even though Pinocchio, which maybe someday we'll do on Deep in the Plus, I don't know. I did watch it. I think everybody kind of went, no, we didn't need this. This one, he still did a good job. Like I really feel like he still did a good job in it. One of my favorite roles for Tom Hanks was in the Carly Rae Jepsen um, video. He was in a Carly Rae Jepsen music video and did an amazing job
Really?
in that one. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
he's so likable. He's just universally beloved. Does
remember,
like a good.
remember
Go
when he
ahead.
got COVID and the whole world was like, "Oh my
Yeah,
God, not Tom Hanks! Please take anybody but not Tom Hanks."
pretty sure we got the news in the middle of an episode of Park Center. And I'm pretty sure I said it, or Pete said it out loud, and we were all, like that was when it really hit us that the pandemic happened was because that was
Anybody but
upon
Tom
us because
Hanks.
Tom Hanks was sick.
Yep.
Yeah, so yeah, he's just like become an icon really of like the last like half century. But this is him at 28 years old. And you said it in the beginning. This is I think this movie, thinking about it, is really making me grapple with like my life and my mortality, because you're like, oh, this movie is almost 40 years old, which now I am. This is also carbon dating me. But I looked up the ages of the actors, and I was like, oh wow, Tom Hanks is a decade younger than I am in this movie. Eugene Levy is exactly the age I am now in this movie. And that is like a really eerie feeling to watch.
Jessica says now he's Elvis's evil manager. And Arch Fox and I may have to have a conversation. Prince was terrible. Yeah, those are fighting words for me, man. Prince was amazing. So we can talk about that some other time, my friend. But let's talk about this scene. So, as that scene that I was talking about in the bathroom, like I said, spiked my anxiety. The same thing with Eugene Levy wanting to out Madison as a mermaid. He had seen her that day at Cape Cod when she rescued Allen. He had seen her under the water. He knew that mermaids existed. He was a scientist, and so then he's now trying to prove to the entire science community that mermaids are real. Which obviously they're like, no, you're ridiculous. So like this, you're a fool. And so his mentor jokingly says, well, if you could throw a bucket of water on her and make her turn back into a mermaid, I guess you could prove it. And so then he spends several scenes of comic relief trying to dump water on her and hits the same couple twice in trying to do it. And then there's the scene where he finally does it, and it's this long, drawn out, slow motion scene where he's spraying the water. And these are supposed to be, first of all, they went to a dinner for the president, which no background check. Maybe that's where we could have found out she was a mermaid. I don't know, but you're just allowed to bring anybody into that thing. Okay, yeah. Well, there was a different time, I guess. But when you go back in and you look at like how long it took them to stop him from spraying, and these are supposed to
Hmm.
be Secret Service men. It was unsettling to me.
Yeah, I think
Just the
that's
whole
another
scene.
thing that like that doesn't hold up now. But he looks like a suicide bomber in a dinner with the president, and he's got the pack on his back, and he's reaching in and has the nozzle looks like a gun, and you just think like they would have taken him down right there in the room. He wouldn't have gotten outside. They wouldn't have wrestled him and pulled him out. So, like he would have been stopped there, and the whole movie would have been over. But I think in the 80s, in a different time, the less tumultuous time, like that people who were watching it were like, yeah, okay, yeah, maybe it would take a while. But now, no way. Not
Yeah, I
believable
mean,
and very unsettling.
yeah, they just the scene goes on forever, and again, that's one of those things where I'm just like, you know, first of all, they should have stopped it immediately. Second, I would hope that that Alan would have stepped in between them, being
Yeah.
trying to save her. But again, Eugene Levy, who has a broken arm and has been beaten down by so many, and you've got how many Secret Service men on either side of him while he continues to spray her with a hose for what seems like so long. But it's another one of those things that tweaks like my anxiety, and I don't know if it's because when I saw it I was younger and I hated that scene because I didn't want her to get caught, or whether it's because like they just don't stop him and it just goes on and on. But it's not one of these things where I'm like this is unrealistic. It's one of these things where I'm like this bothers me. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think there are like a lot of things that are like making the scene stressful, and it's supposed to be, but like part of it is like worrying about her. She's also finally ready to tell him, so it's like you just want them to get out of there so she could have the conversation with him. For her to
Well,
be like
but
publicly exposed like that,
that's
all of that.
always, yeah, that's always the like the catalyst for the story is the lie. I told you one thing and I will tell you the truth. I will tell you that, you know, that I paid, this girl to make me look good and can't buy me love, or that I, that this was part of some bet, and she's all that, or whatever the case. There's always that lie that gets exposed finally, and then the couple parts, and then they come back together. So that
Yeah,
happened
although
in
not
this
quite a
one.
lie here. She's pretty upfront that she's got something that she's going to need to tell him at some point. And she
True.
starts off being vague and he digs and she's like, I don't want to, let's keep it like really, I've got 6 days. I don't want to get into why I have
Yeah.
days, but like I just have 6 days. Let's enjoy it. And then he's like offended and pries and pries and pries and pries. And she's like, okay, eventually I'm going to tell you what the thing is. He's trying to
Six
guess
fun,
her secret.
but
He
six
guesses
fun-filled
all sorts of
days.
things.
Six
Six
fun-filled
fun
days.
filled days.
Yes,
Yes.
that there are several lines from this that again are stuck in my head, were burned in, and that's one of them. The 6 fun-filled days, like that's one of those things that I will just never forget. The same thing as like, the scene where she's like, "I was shy." For some reason, that's stuck in my head. And then the same, like some of these other lines that I'm just like, I would say them before they said them in this movie. I haven't seen this movie in.
Mm.
I rewatched it for this, but I haven't seen this movie in at least 10, 15 years, I don't think. And so, but I always think of it as a movie that I enjoyed. So, since you liked it and enjoyed it so much, let me ask you a couple trivia questions if you got a second. And if you're watching at home, please
Okay.
make sure to play along, and then also, give us a like if you haven't already. And then also, man, there's a lot of stuff to do tonight. You also gotta weigh in on this. Is if you think there should be a sequel to this. And again, in my world, the sequel has the original cast. Obviously, you can't have John Candy, but the original cast in it. And then the remake, which we already know is on the table, with Jillian Bell and Magic Mike. So anyway, when they go to the like the I want to keep wanting to call it the fruit stand, but it's their fruit business, and he gets the call from his girlfriend that says, "I'm leaving right now because you can't commit and you can't tell me that you love me." What was his girlfriend's name?
Ooh.
Because they say it a lot at the wedding too. They're like, "Oh,
Yeah.
where's?"
Rachel, I'm gonna guess, but I don't remember.
No, it's Victoria.
Victoria.
Uh, yeah, Victoria. Um, then they're going to one of their the guy that works for them. They're going to his wedding. He comes up several times, and they mention his name in the movie. Do you know his name? Jerry. Okay,
I'm
I
gonna
think
go
that was a little
bat
bit.
0 for 0 all the time. Yeah.
Uh, what was the name of the captain of the little dinghy that was going to take him out to Cape Cod?
Oh, I do not remember.
Fat Jack, because he kept calling him Mr. Fat Jack or Captain Fat Jack. Um, Here's something that I thought was funny: is Kornbluth, who is the character that Eugene Levy plays, was on a fishing boat for doing like diving. Do you know the name of that boat?
No, but I do remember seeing it and taking note and thinking I should write this down because I think this is the kind of thing that Rob might ask me, and then I was too engrossed in the movie and didn't write it down.
Yeah. By the way, Arch Fox, I will forgive you on that one. He said that Prince was awful not in Batman, but not musically. Yes. Okay. Well, we're good. Um, so it was Victorious, which is interesting since her name was Victoria. You wouldn't think that they would put those two things in the same movie, but the name of the ship was Victorious.
Mm.
Um, there's a park ranger who was actually one of the screenwriters. There were two screenwriters that
Wow.
made cameos in the movie. The park ranger at Ellis Island, who's giving the tour, was one, and I won't ask you his name. His name on his name tag it says Weber, which I don't. I'm not going to ask you that. I'm going to ask you something else about him. But the other screenwriter was the guy who chases Tom Hanks down and tackles him to get his skates off. Those are the two guys who wrote the screenplay. So I thought that was interesting. But that park ranger is
Oh,
standing
wow.
there, and he says that the Statue of Liberty was a symbol of hope for naked women everywhere because he sees her coming, and then he yells something. It's two words. Do you know what he yelled? Because it stood out to me.
I
I was
don't
like,
remember.
"What? Bocce balls."
Yeah.
He's like,
Oh.
was a symbol of hope for naked women. Ah, bocce balls. It just yells it out. I don't know. I thought that was funny. Um, uh, she was watching TVs. That's how she learned to talk.
Mhm.
She's watching these TVs and they pan across and she's in what store? What famous
I
store
mean,
is she in?
initially she was in Bloomingdale's, but I don't know
No,
what.
I believe the whole
Yeah.
thing's supposed to take place in Bloomingdale. So yes,
Yeah.
so she's in that store. They pan across and they show different TVs with different things on. One of them was Capitol, which is an old soap opera that my mom used to watch as they're panning across. And then they
Wow.
pan across and you see a shot from a Disney movie.
Ooh.
I don't think for
Ooh.
$1 million you could tell me what Disney movie it was, but it was one that as a kid that I kind of liked.
I don't know what Disney movie it was. I was really just enjoying the old school aerobics video that she was doing. What was the Disney movie?
The black hole.
The Black Hole. Wow, that's a deep cut.
Yes. Well, I mean, it is deep in the plus. That's what we do here. Um, but yeah, I thought that was kind of cool. As they're panning across, and she's like, face into it because it would have been around the same time that movie was out there. So, um, did it bother? I think I have one last trivia question here for you. I don't know that you're going to know the answer to this though. One of the questions I was going to ask you is Freddie meets two women in a bar before Alan when he's like hungover and before he goes to Cape Cod. Their names are Jill and Tawny. They have a timeshare, and I was going to ask you where the timeshare was. It's in Rio, but I feel like
Rio.
that would have been too much.
That one I
The last
remember is Rio. I looked at my
dude, would
husband and
you?
I was like, Rio? I was like Rio,
Ah,
Brazil?
man. The other question I was going to ask you is what was the doorman's name at
No,
Alan's
these kinds of
building?
things I don't remember, but Rio I remember. That was notable.
Well, I'm sorry I messed that up for you. I should have let you just go on that one.
Yeah, it's
Um,
fine. I don't mind, batting zero for zero.
it was Timmy.
Hmm.
So anyway, thanks for playing along. I know that that's pretty silly, but I love like catching those little things and wondering if everybody sees the same little nonsense in these that I do when I'm watching it. So um, I'm gonna show this real quick. I don't think we'll get caught for it, but so there's that, and here is a commercial, and where is it? It should be the next one. There it is.
Oh, wow.
So anyway, the next thing that I was going to say was that she's out of control when she's walking through the city, and there seems to be like no accountability. If she broke, what do we think, 10 TVs with a scream of her name, don't we think that? Do we think Alan paid for those? And then when they go out in the street and she runs into the middle of the street and then a car slams on its brakes and another car runs into it, they just walk away. Is that are we allowed to do that?
Well,
You're from New York. You tell me. Is that
yeah,
allowed?
the second thing, absolutely. The first thing is like, could this woman's voice really be the cause of like all of this? Like that, it's kind of. I think that is the kind of thing where people would be so. If she had taken like a bat to them or something, or really behaved in some crazy way, sure. But like it would, I think everyone would be so astonished that they could probably slink out. But they walking through the street, absolutely, stuff like that
Yep.
happens like all the time, and people just keep moving.
One of the other things that's very iconic for me in this movie is that fountain, because, and you know why the fountain is so iconic. You know why.
The Hans Christian Andersen fountain.
But where did it go after this movie?
The one that's in Central Park, the Mermaid Fountain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, no, it went to Hollywood Studios.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, it was at Hollywood Studios, right in that courtyard area outside of the backlot tour, and it was like
Mm.
between there and the Roger Rabbit shop. So that's why every time I look at this, I think of like the splash fountain from that. So
Oh, that's so
I
nice.
and I look at this and I go, how did they get it into this room? Because you look at the
I
base of
had the
that
same
thing.
question.
I mean, I
Not
guess
through
that's
that
what makes
door.
it funny. Maybe the same thing. Patrick and I reviewed Herbie Goes Bananas with the kid who played Paco. Joaquin Garay III actually was on the show with us, and there was a scene that he said took place on a soundstage, and on the soundstage they had they made up a hotel room, and that's where like Herbie was on the cruise ship in a hotel room, like there's a full car in the hotel room, and the question just comes up, how would you have gotten a car in a hotel? Like, it makes no sense. You know how small the cabins are on a cruise ship. Even the biggest ones, you're not going to be able to get a car in, whether you take it
Yeah.
through the veranda or what. So this one, looking at it, I'm just like, I mean, from a comedic standpoint, it's funny that it takes up the whole room, but I'm like, how would you do that? I'm okay with the fact that she turns into a mermaid and goes away and swims away, but I'm not okay with the fact that there seems to be no earthly way they would have gotten this into this room. Sorry.
I mean, I sort of like the gag. It was like his face and like it. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so, um, so when they finally go, like she gets outed as a mermaid, they take her to this, to do all this experimentation on her and him. They think he might be a mermaid. They drop her into the tank with him, and now he's like, let me back up a second. He wants her to stay. They're ice skating. And he has a moment of, this is again one of these things that makes me a little unsettled, a moment of almost emotional blackmail where he asks her to marry him and she says no, and I can't tell you because I just want to enjoy my time here. And then he gets up and basically huffs away.
Yep. Yep.
And then
And they've
she
been together
finally,
for all of 48 hours, maybe 24 hours, and he's upset that she's like, I don't want to talk about this now.
yeah, but then he just gets mad. Like, I mean, it seems uncharacteristic for Alan for everything else that we've seen. He just gets just blatantly angry in this scene. It just seems uncharacteristic for him. And also, as we talked about for Tom Hanks, America's Sweetheart at the time, it feels uncharacteristic for that. But it feels like emotional blackmail. Like, do what I want, or I'm just gonna be mad at you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So again, not something I would have thought about then, but it also is another one of those moments in this movie that just seems super intense. And maybe we're just not used to seeing that stuff in something that's a Disney movie. But there's a lot of that. There's a lot of great moments in this, and I think maybe some of the awkward or the anxious moments lead to the big payoffs and the big wins as it goes along, and probably again goes back to whatever Ron Howard's vision was of the whole thing, because he's the one who orchestrates how you feel in each individual scene. So I guess that was the key there. But I just remember this being a really good movie. But going back on it, I feel like there's a lot of really intense moments on it. Um, so there's a very unnecessary moment in the movie where what I was going to say was they go to break her out of the of where she's locked up, and it's kind of funny the way they do it, because this is where I think John Candy and Eugene Levy really shine in their comedy. Is they go in and they're the Swedes as they go in, and John Candy's hilarious in that part, and then as they're trying to leave, and he's like, Eugene Levy's like, good God, man, like, don't go in there. It was very, that's where I think their comedy kicks in. But then when we come in and we see the links that Freddie has gone to to for the gag. Like
Yeah.
he has fashioned together some sort of a fishing situation, just for the gag here. So
Yeah, I
you know,
actually laughed out loud when you opened it. It's one of those reveals, and they open the door, and there's John Candy with a cigar and a makeshift fishing pole,
yep,
and it's silly and slapstick, but it's so funny.
yep. No, I agree. So then they chase them all the way through New York. By the way, I have to ask you a question again, as a New Yorker. This ice skating rink they went to, why didn't they go to skate at Rockefeller Plaza?
I said to myself, I was like, where is this even? Like, it's like, and look, I Rockefeller can be very, very overcrowded. It can be very, very overpriced. A ton of tourists, a ton of what we call bridge and tunnel people, which are people coming in from the suburbs for the day to like just ice skate and then getting back on the train and going back to the suburbs. And it just can be a little bit unpleasant, but there are other places to go, like that are not that far away, like Bryant Park, which is lovely, and they have an ice skating rink there, and they set that up, and it's not usually crowded. So, but this rink is like the size of like my office here, and it's terrible, and I can't tell where it is. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, tourism tips for New York from Allison. No, but I mean that's the first thing that popped up to me was like, why is this not in Rockefeller Plaza? I'm almost
Center, yeah.
I'm almost getting like Rocket Tower stuck in my head
Yeah,
from
Rocket Tower
Tomorrowland.
Plaza, Rockefeller Center.
Yeah,
It really sounds a lot
that's
like
where
Rocket
that's
Tower
where
Plaza.
that's where I'm messing up. That's where I'm messing up. So it's just kind of like people sometimes instead of saying Disney Plus, say Deep in the Plus, which I love, or if they say Carousel Products instead of Carousel Products, also makes me laugh. Jake says, "What is this ice skating?" I mean, do you not know what ice skating is, Jake? Is that the question, or do you not remember when there was ice skating in the movie? Um, yeah, so usually that takes place like at the base of 30 Rock, but here is the makeshift one that they put together, and you can see like there's like fake fencing and little benches, and it could have been
Mhm.
anywhere USA what they've put together here.
Yeah, I have
So
no idea where this is. And you can see like it's a weird rink where you can see like almost like tiles of ice put together, not like one big sheet of ice. It's very strange.
yeah, I agree. Here's a better shot of it. Hang on.
Yeah, there you go. You see those squares there? It looks like tiles.
Yeah, which that is the thing to have synthetic instead of actual ice because nothing else about this indicates that it was winter. When he jumps into the
Mm.
water or when she jumps into the water, nothing else indicates that it's winter. Even though there are lights and even though there is mock ice, none of that. Like it seems like they really went out of their way to have this scene happen on a skating rink, and I'm not really sure why.
Just so we could watch a really angry Tom Hanks try to chase after her in ice skates.
Okay. So anyway, so they race all the way to the end. Oh, he says because I'm a Texan and a Floridian, I don't know what ice skating is. I'm sure they
Mm.
have. I mean, the Tampa Bay Lightning has some place where they ice skate, don't they? I mean, there's got to be some place. So when you go and they're chased through the city and they get through the city and they get to the docks, they say something very plausible. She was ready to commit to stay with him because if she didn't leave within the 6 fun-filled days when the moon was full, she couldn't go back, and so she was ready to stay with him. She's made that commitment. That was part of that. Like I said, the emotional blackmail thing is where she comes back to him and says, "Okay, I'll marry you. Like I'll give up everything and I'll marry you." We don't know what everything is for her because all we know is she was in the water anytime we've seen her. We don't have family. We don't know anything about friends. We don't know anything about a place where she lives, any of that kind of stuff. But she's like, okay, I'll stay. Now he's like, you can't. She goes, I was ready to stay. He said, you can't stay because, even if you did, they would never leave you alone now. And she says, I realize that, but you can come with me. And he's like, I can't swim. She said, remember when you were little, and you're with me, you could breathe underwater. Which I don't now. There's this whole mythology. We get the whole mythology about a mermaid, right? The mermaid is she's on dry land, she can walk, and when she gets in the water, then she has a fin. Is he going to grow a fin? Like, you've left me with so many questions now about this, because now all of a sudden he can swim underwater where he couldn't swim before. He can breathe underwater, which, okay, suspension of disbelief on that. But what's going to happen to him now? Is he just going to kind of evolve into a merman at this point?
Hmm.
Because all of
Yeah,
the
a lot of
tails,
questions.
yeah, it's weird. But at the very
He's still
very
wearing his
end,
dress shoes too toward the end. He's got the
yeah.
dress shoes on, the dress pants on, the shirt's a
So
little loose.
so he jumps into the water at the last minute. They have this fight with way too many guys in diving suits. That, like, how did they all get here all at once? There was a Coast Guard helicopter, but how they all got suited up and 6 guys dive in, no idea. Excuse me. So then once that happens, he decides, I'm going to go in with her. They, she uses her tail to beat up a bunch of them, and then they swim away, and then it's like the happily ever after. But as the credits roll and we see this at the end, which almost seems
Oh,
like a Tron sort of a situation with the way that it glows. But I assume that this is where she's from, which would lead to some sort of, dare I say, sequel. I mean, where is this that they've gone? Like, and it's so like sudden that they show you this at the end. It just kind of appears, and then the movie's over. What's happening, Allison?
yeah. No, and I didn't even notice that because I was just by that point the movie was over for me. But yeah, that is a fascinating
And then the movie's over for me.
little glimpse into, yeah. No, it looks like Atlantis or something like underwater. It's
Or Atlantica, could be. Yeah. So whatever happens to him, I don't know. But when Splash 2 comes out, which, again, let's go ahead and put this up because you've got one final chance here, folks, to tell me. It looks like we're leaning sequel instead of remake, which, again, would be great if Allen and Madison came back and it was Tom Hanks and Daryl Hannah reprising these roles would be great to me. But whatever nonsense they put together that was Splash TOO, which, again, is not available on Disney Plus, I don't know where we would find it. I guess you could find it on YouTube or something. Um, is that they were living on an island somewhere, and then they come back. Well, she had said to him, "You can never come back," because he's like, "This is great. I'll come with you. I'll come back and see Freddie at Christmas. It'll be great." And she's like, "No, you can never go back. Like, this is the moment where you decide. You can't say goodbye to Freddie. You can't say goodbye to anybody. This is it, and you can never come back." I don't know why he could never come back. I mean, she came during the moon. Would he not be able to do that too? Why can he never come? Unless she's going to kill him, which is, again, one of those sea shanty, like, kind of a situations that the mermaid lures the sailor out to sea to die. Is that what's going to happen here? Have we
I
misread
don't
this
think that.
entire movie? Is it not really a love story?
And it goes back to the horror inklings you got when she was in the tub. No, I can't imagine that that's the case. But it is. It is. It doesn't really. It's not explained. It doesn't make sense. But it also doesn't explain like why she got those 6 days during that during that particular moon phase either. So, like, did she only get that once in a lifetime? And why did she only get it once in a lifetime?
Yeah.
What kind of deal did she make? Did she talk to a sea witch? And did the sea witch say, "You've got 6 days, and if he falls in love with you, you have a choice where you can either go with him and be there forever with him, and you can never come back, or he can be with you forever, and you can never go back, but you've got your man." I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe we'd find that out.
Jarrett says also neither nor a sequel nor a remake because they ruined the original movie. I would say sometimes that is true. Godfather 2, I don't think that is true of, nor there are several Star Wars movies I would draw your attention to. But anyway, it does happen a lot, though, where, I've said it a million times that when you have a sequel, you have to ruin the happy ending that you just had and break that down so that then you can build to the next one. And so usually any of those movies that end happily ever after, the relationship gets ruined or something happens and things get messed up. So I don't know. I think that, though, with this, I would rather see that sequel with where they are now. and then be able to decide, okay, well, we don't necessarily need to have that, but if you want it, it's there. And that's one of the great things about Disney Plus is they can make those things happen. Is like, you know what, here's a little continuation, here's a little nod to that. But then again, sometimes you get like the Santa Clauses. So I mean, you never know what's going to happen. But Toy Story 4 ruined. Toy Story 3 was perfect. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, we talked about that. Toy Story 4 was unnecessary. So anyway, we've talked all about this. We didn't talk about the Rita Coolidge song, which I think we could do without. We talked about the cast and the movie, and again, we were doing this leading up to Valentine's Day because it is a theoretically romantic comedy. So at this point, Allison, I have just one last question for you, and I feel like I know your answer, but I'm ready to give you center stage. Would you recommend this movie?
Absolutely, I'd recommend this movie. And I'm actually surprised. I knew I liked it from when I was a kid. I had good memories of it, but I'm actually surprised at how much I enjoyed it start to finish. And it's the kind of thing that I'm going to be like, people should revisit this movie. People should rewatch it in the way that we rewatch When Harry Met Sally and Sleepless in Seattle and You've Got Mail, that are like really iconic rom-coms. We should add this one to the list, especially because it's an early work of Tom Hanks.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, and it looks like again we've landed on sequel instead of remake, which I think that we're more likely to see a remake from this Channing Tatum thing. But I loved this movie, and I would definitely recommend it. And I think the big question I ask at the thumbnail and at the top of this is, did this stand the test of time? And I think it does. I think there are a lot of movies, especially in the '80s, where you look at it and you're like, it doesn't really still hold up. It doesn't really still translate into 2023, or the pacing is too slow. And again, I attribute all of that to Ron Howard and his directing, and the way that he is able to guide you through this movie. There were some things, like I said, that gave me anxiety that I didn't remember until I got into it. I was like, oh yeah, this is how I feel about this scene. But in general, I mean, this is a classic. This is a classic. Now, I guess Disney movie. It's a touchstone, but I think this is a classic Disney movie, and I think everyone should see it. I think it's great. So I appreciate you doing this review with me. I want to say thank you to our WIGS members. We love our WIGS. The WDW Interglobe Society, WDWNT Interglobe Society, which is our Patreon program. If you want to find out more about it, go to patreon.com/WDWNT. Also, don't forget that we are going to be... we have our 150th review coming up, not next week, but the week after. It's hard to believe. I mean, 2019, November 2019, Deep in the Plus started, and this will be 150 reviews. It'll be the third longest running show on the network. So I'm very excited for us to do that. We're going to have a panel of people talking about The Greatest Showman, which is something that we've all been excited to do and to watch. So please join us for that in 2 weeks. Man, next week is we're going to do another countdown, or basically a ranking show. Patrick and I did one for Pixar, which got some comments. We did another one for Marvel on Disney Plus, and now Desi and I are going to rank the 11 cinematic Star Wars releases next Wednesday night. So please join us for that. We would love for you to be on with us then. And then again, we've got lots of great programming. News Tonight is on tomorrow night. Boxed In will do a special edition on Sunday. There will not be a Park Center then because of, I think there's a football game on or something. I don't remember. But thank you guys for being with us. Allison, as always, I really appreciate you coming on here and spending time with me. Thank you so much.
Love you, Rob. So fun.
Oh, I love you too. And everybody else, thank you for spending your Wednesday night with us. We will see you again next time. Have a great week. Talk to you soon.